mentioned, I have two QTHs. I'm down in the Massachusetts one, Woburn. It's about 10 miles north of Boston. And my other one is in Harpswell. We spend about a third of the time there. I was first licensed back in 1962. I was living down in Stratford, Connecticut, down near Bridgeport and New Haven as a sophomore in high school. So when that was back my novice days, of course, back then, novice was only good for a year. So I upgraded to a technician after 6 months. And then while I was in college in Cambridge in 1966, I wanted a separate call. Well, back then you had to have separate station license and operator license, very different than it is now. So if you wanted a second station, you had to have a second station license. And I very luckily was reissued W1DYJ. So it's not it's actually a real call in a sense. It's not a virtual or, requested call. So anyway, let's get going on FT8. It's not a prefix, as I sort of kiddingly say in the title. There are a bunch of FT8 prefixes. I've talked to a couple of them, but the others are pretty rare. But it really is a powerful, and I have new in quotes because it's not that new anymore. It's been around since 2017. But let's go through this. I'll talk a little bit about what it's all about. Actually, about half of the talk will be about that first section about FT8 and how it all works and stuff. And then a little bit about hardware and software setups. Spending some time on a application called JT Alert. Some of you may know about this. Some of you may not. It's very, very interesting, useful thing. Talk a little bit about reporting sites, and finally, a couple of slides about my experience. So let's get going. I'm not going to be talking about the clones. There's something called JTDX out there and a few others. I don't know anything about them. I basically have stayed with the WSJTX basic systems. Some of these clones, incidentally, allow you to do things that are illegal, like automatic QSOs and stuff, and that's not allowed in the United States. It isn't in some parts of the world. So let's talk about sort of an intro to it. Let's see, I've got something up here I got to get rid of. There we go. Oh, that didn't help. I got rid of my annotation. Where did it go? I lost my annotation. It's the wrong thing. There we go. Okay. FT8 is controversial. Riley was talking about, he mentioned FT8 is new stuff. It really is controversial. It has been. It's less now than it was. But I want to mention that Part 97 does say one of the things we're supposed to be doing is advancing the communication and technical skills of radio. And certainly these kinds of new modes do that. And not only that, as Riley mentioned, if you were listening to him, it brings in a lot of the younger people who are really more computer oriented than a lot of us are, or were at least. I look at FT8 and FT4 and all these new things as sort of related to RIDI and PSK and sort of those things, the same way CW was related to Spark or sideband AM. And in fact, my first phone rig was a 6-meter homebrew 2E26 on 6 meters. And I remember back then in the mid 60s, the SSB AM wars, people talking about, duck talk and all kinds of stuff. So this is not new. It happened with CW when it replaced Spark. It happened when sideband, for the most part, replaced AM. And it's happening again. There's some controversy here. I know there's some people out there that say they don't even think FT8 is ham radio because you can't rag chew with it, for instance. But it's really good for DXing and some contesting. Anyway, it started. I'm seeing something up here that I can't get rid of. There we go. I can move. There we go. I moved it out of the way. WSJT stands for Weak Signal Joe Taylor. Joe, K1JT, he's a Nobel Prize winning professor from Princeton. He discovered a new kind of pulsar, and he actually did it with Arecibo, our suddenly lost wonderful eye on the sky. It's been around since 2001. This is WSJT, the original. Okay, and one of the things that some of us used, I used it, was JT65. Back then, it came out in 2003. It was designed for EME, weak troposcatter. Most of these systems are really designed for VHF, UHF stuff. Joe basically took his knowledge of space communications and repurposed it for ham radio. And for all of, we're very thankful because he has really given us some really good stuff. So let's keep going. WSJTX came out in 2017, version 2.0.0, X for experimental. It added a bunch of things, MSK 144 for meteor scatter. A lot of you may know about Whisper, a weak signal propagation reporter. FT8 was designed for 6-meter E-skip. Fundamentally, it wasn't designed for HF at all. It's 6-meter E-skip and higher bands. And it basically was a shorter version of JT65. Well, turns out, and Bill Somerville is one of the guys that is very much involved in this. If you get on some of the email reflectors, Bill, you'll see 10 or 15 emails from Bill every day almost at times, especially when new versions come out. It turns out FT8 on HF was purely an accident. They didn't aim it this way. Suddenly it was discovered, and as all the amateurs do, we take what's out there and use it a different way than it's intended to. And basically that's what happened. FT8 took off because it was a really great way of doing HFDX. So talk about some sensitivity. If in your typical 2500 hertz bandwidth on your rig sideband, you need a signal noise ratio of about plus 10 dB. CW, mostly because you're decreasing the bandwidth, 0 to minus 10 dB signal to noise, you can do it. If someone with really good ears and a good radio, may get down to 15 dB below the signal noise ratio and still be able to decode sideband, CW. FT8, and these are Joe Taylor's numbers. FT8 gets down to minus 21 dB, he claims. I often see decodes down to minus 24 dB. And as far as I know, the winner right now is Whisper. The weak signal propagation reporter gets down to about minus 31 dB. 31 dB below the noise level. It's 1,000 times below the noise level, something like that. It's obviously more sensitive than CW. One of the reasons why so many people love it, because it works just as well as CW for things like DX, for instance. Technically, the F is for Stephen Franke, and the T is Joe. These are the guys who pretty much were the core team when this first came out. It's an 8-tone. That's where the 8 comes from. FSK. Okay, so every tone that's transmitted, every tone is a baud. Typical information theory, 1 baud. In this case, it's 8 tones, so it's 3 bits. So every time that you send a tone, you're actually sending 3 bits of information. 15-second TR timing. Those of you who use FT8 will know all this. The tone spacing is 6.25 hertz, 50 hertz bandwidth, and it's a 77-bit word. Here's what actually gets transmitted when you send out your FT8 signal. It's 77 bits followed by a 14-bit cyclical redundancy check. And this is what gives it the error correction so well. If you look at this, 2 to the 77th, this allows basically 10 to the 23rd possible messages to be sent with this. Every time you send your 15-second transmit, it could be one of 10 to the 23rd. If I remember my high school physics, I think this is Avogadro's number or something like that. It's a lot of stuff. Okay, so it's very powerful in terms of the information it can send, and with the CRC, the error correcting, which is why it works so well. It works so well under the noise. So operationally, what is it? It's weak signal, obviously, if it can hear that low. It sends the absolute minimum info to be a legal QSO. Okay, it's not designed, as I've said, for much more than just minimum signal for DXing and some contesting. Very structured. Those who use it will understand this. You can send in one of the time periods, you can send a maximum of 13 freeform characters. That's about it. That's the only thing you can really change in any real way. And both ends are using the exact same syntax. So it's not QRP. There's some confusion between weak signal and QRP. These FT modes do not require you to send QRP. I normally send transmit at 80 watts. I don't have an amplifier here, never have. So I normally send about 80 watts just because I don't want to push my rig to the full 100 watts. And it's obviously not for rag chewing. And I'll talk at the end a little bit about how much power you should be sending. So I talked about the syntax. It's very straightforward, and this is pretty much automated. I'll be calling CQ. Syntax is very simply CQ, my call, and my FN42 down here in Massachusetts, FN43 if I'm in Harpswell. Someone calls me, sends their grid. I go back and I send the signal noise ratio. They come back and say R, signal noise ratio. R means that they have copied me. You know, the typical R, I copy you. And then you go back and you have a choice. You can send either RRR or RR73. And there is some confusion about this if you are operating FT8. What's the difference? If you're sending RRR, you expect a 73. Okay, this is where the confusion happens. If you're sending RR73, and you can switch between these easily, if you're sending RR73, you do not expect to get a 73 back. And a lot of people argue this. You don't want to use RR73 unless the signals are really good and you know the other guy's going to hear it. Because if I get this, I log it. If someone else gets it, they should log it. If the person I'm talking to sends RR73, that means they've copied me, they can log me. They do not expect a 73 back from me. So be careful about using these two. RR or means you really want a 73 back because you're not sure the guy's going to hear you. RR73 means, oh, I know I'm strong, you're strong. I don't care about you sending a 73. So you can do it. You can send a 73, but that would be purely just a thank you. It doesn't mean anything about the fact that you can log it or not. This is also TX5, and I'll explain what these are in a bit. TX5, this is sort of the standard default, but you can customize this to 13 characters, okay? And if you use the English alphabet with a space, 27 characters, 13 spaces, you can have up to 10 to the 18th different messages in here. So you can pretty much send anything you want. Just make sure, as Riley said, it's clean. So let's keep going. The current history, and I have a note up here because when anything comes out, you really need to do this. Here's the current history. They all have release notes. You've really got to read the release notes on this, okay? 2.0 came out, as I mentioned, in September, in 2017 in August. 2.1 is when FT4 was introduced a couple years later. FT4 is aimed at contesting. And it's pretty much the same as FT8, except it's twice as fast and therefore half the sensitivity. Simple information theory, half the information, half the sensitivity, or half the time, half the sensitivity. It's got some other nice things in it. It shapes the FT8 transmitted signals a little better, so it decodes better. And just a comment here, FT4 is aimed at contesting. I'm involved in between 25 and 30 contests a year. I really enjoy contesting. I actually don't like using FT8 or 4 for contesting. About the only time I do that is on VHF contests where everyone has moved from 6 meters to FT8 or FT4. But fundamentally, I don't really enjoy these for contesting. I love them for DX. So let's keep going. 2.2 came out in June of 2020, and that's where they added some European contesting formats. This is what I'm still using. I'm using 2.2.2 right now. 2.3 was just introduced last month. It includes FST4 and FST4W. I have not used them. I don't know much about them other than they're designed for 160 and down. So these are aimed at 160 and 630 and 2200 meters, if I remember the numbers. And there's got some other improvements. So it's always worthwhile upgrading, even if you don't plan on using the new modes. And then at the same time, they introduced 2.3. They introduced 2.4.0-RC1. And let me make a comment about these. These are release candidates. They're betas. 2.3 got to RC4, had 4 different betas before they finally released 2.3.0 last month. I don't go to the 0.0. I don't buy a 0.0 of anything. I don't buy a car the first year it's out. I don't buy software in a 0.0 format. They're always buggy. Even though these guys go through many release candidates after a whole bunch of alpha testing. And as I said, 2.3 got to RC4, 4 different beta candidates. When they get out for general release, a lot of more people start using them and they still find bugs. So I don't upgrade to the newest version personally until 2.3.1 is out. And it probably will be fairly soon, because this has been out long enough that they'll get out some more bugs. 2.4 introduces something called Q65. It's, again, these are sort of improved versions of earlier modes. This is aimed at EME, very weak signal, UHF, VHF, okay? Just yesterday, they introduced RC2 for the 2.4 version. So this is going in sort of a standard kind of thing. It'll be another month or two, you'll have RC3, and then they'll do a general release of this. Okay, so lots of different versions out there. I'm basically still using FT8 myself. I've used a bit of FT4. I really don't see that much difference, but it hasn't really gotten that popular in contesting yet. And I haven't even gotten near any of this stuff. Okay, a little bit of history just to show you how it took off. This is from Club Log. For those of you who don't know what Club Log is, it's sort of a repository of queues, mostly used by DXers and contesters. You upload all your, it's sort of like Logbook of the World in the sense of you upload your log. This is not, you don't confirm your QSOs the way you do on Logbook of the World, but you put them there and other people can see them. And many of the DXers actually use this as a way to ask for QSL cards and stuff. By you click on it and you can ask for a QSL card free through the Bureau or for a couple bucks or whatever they ask for a direct thing. But anyway, they keep a lot of data. Again, it's mostly DX and contesting, so you're not going to get a lot of people sending stuff up to Club Log who do nothing but rag chewing. So it's a little bit biased. But here's FT8. This is 2017. Here's August when FT8 was announced. This is the end of 2019. So this is for 2 years. Here's FT8. It just really takes off to the point where by the end of 2019, 65% of the QSOs that Club Log was collecting was FT8. CW is the blue. It's slowly decreasing, but not really hard. Same as phone is slowly decreasing. A lot of CW and phone people are going to FT8 at certain times of the year or certain bands. Certainly with no sunspots, FT8 has helped. Down here is what's really happened is pretty much all of the digital modes, other PSK, I'm not sure what the other is, but it's everything else. PSK and RIDI, they're just almost gone to zero. So there's been a huge switch from, and I'm guessing some of these may be Olivia and some of those other things that I don't know much about. But basically, FT8 has really taken off. Okay, so why did I get into FT8? Well, I had tried PSK when it first came out. I like trying new stuff. And I just found that PSK, first of all, I'm not a typist. I'm a 3-finger typist. So if you can't keyboard very well, PSK sort of devolves into being nothing but sending back and forth what are called these brag files. And, you know, I've got tired of telling everyone what kind of computer I have and getting a file saying this guy's computer is bigger than my computer, all that kind of stuff. So I gave up on PSK years ago. JT65 mentioned came out. I tried that. It's very slow. JT65 is 1 minute per transmission. And I just felt like it was, you know, watching paint dry or something. So I gave up on that. And then FT8 came out and I started using it and, oh, it's more sensitive than CW, as I said. And that's very important to me because my CW skills are really meager. I never really learned CW as a novice. That's another whole story. And my CW skills are still pretty bad. And what this really means, though, is that for somebody like me who runs barefoot, as I said, I've never had an amplifier, probably never will. All of my HF antennas are homebrew. For the most part, some of my VHF antennas are kits, but just about every antenna I have, both down here and up in Harpswell, are homebrew antennas. So for a guy like me with a small station, it means I can really do DX. And I'll show the effect of that at the very end. So FT8's great if you want to do DX. It's not, as I said, if you want to talk to somebody, forget it. It's not for rag chewing. So let's keep going. Let's talk about hardware setup. This would be very short, but the most important thing here is this page. If you can do PSK 31 or you can do audio FSK RTTY, you're all set. Your hardware is set up. However, the way you set up your rig is very important. You want to set up your transmitter for no processing, flat equalization, and your ALC is more or less 0. This is very rig dependent. Some rigs require a little bit of ALC, some require none. This is something you got to experiment with or talk to your friends with the same rig to learn out how to set up the ALC to run FT8. And what's going on here is if you start shaping your transmit passband, you process it or you equalize it, or if your ALC is too high, what will happen is you're screwing up the phase of the signals, and the phase of the signals gets screwed up, they won't decode. So you want to have this as flat as possible. Same thing on receive. Turn off your noise reduction. Use full sideband bandwidth. Don't narrow your bandwidth down to like, I'm going to listen to 1500 hertz in the audio spectrum, so I'm only going to look at plus or minus 200 hertz around 1500. Full sideband bandwidth. I usually run mine from 300 to 3 kilohertz. Flat response. Again, because you want to let the software do what it's intended to do. It does it very well. And if you start screwing up with the bandwidths and stuff like this, it's going to mess it up. So make your transmitter and receiver as plain and simple as possible. And again, worry about ALC. You may have to experiment with that. Okay, so here's my my rig up in Harpswell. I've very simple shack. And in fact, I've got a 590S up there. It's a USB system, USB ported rig. Very simple, one cable for sends both read control and audio. So if you're running, you want to run FT8 or any of these modes, even RTTY or PSK, and you have a USB rig, very straightforward. Of course, you know, just again, one cable, very simple. Down here in Woburn, this is my setup down here. I started this with a TS2000. I still use this thing. It's 20 years old now. I still use it on VHF and UHF. A little bit more complex. I won't go through the details here in general, but I needed a couple of USB to serial because a laptop only has USB, of course. If you have a desktop, it may have some RS-232 ports. But USB for rig control through a USB to serial adapter. Another one, this RT Systems thing, this thing is 20 years old, as is the Rig Blaster no mic I have. These are 20 years old because I bought them when I got this thing to start playing with some of these older, like PSK and stuff. So it's a little more complicated, but you can do it. You have to play around a little bit more, but it's achievable. So that's about it for hardware. I won't go into the details. Every rig is a little different. With USB rigs, there's usually a codec you have to download and stuff, and there's all kinds of stuff like that to play with. But once you get it going, it's usually pretty stable. So software setup. Well, WSGTX comes in Windows, Linux, and Mac OS versions. It's one of the few things out there that's not solely Windows. I'm a Windows guy. If you're into Linux, it's open source stuff. That's how these clones happen. But if you're into Linux, you can have a lot of fun with it. Mac, because here you've got to, of course, do it all yourself from, I forget what they call the packages you download. Mac, it's a little bit easier, but still there's a lot of fiddling around to do. Windows is fairly straightforward. There are 2 email groups. And I strongly suggest if you're going to get involved in the WSJTX things that you really at least get involved with a WSJTX general group, especially if you're going to be running Linux, because I monitor both of these mostly for the fun of it. And I'd say that on a normal day, I get about 10 emails of people asking questions on this guy, WSJT.devel, D-E-V-E-L. This is for use when you're going to decide to get involved with these release candidates. Now, comment. If you're going to do the release candidates, they really want you to be involved with the beta testing. So they really want you to be serious about testing it, feeding back bugs, and all this kind of stuff. And that's what this is designed for. People aren't really that religious about splitting these up, but I monitor this too. And I can tell you that when there's a new release, like today, there's about 50 emails that came out of RC developing because that RC2 for 2.4 was just released. So this gets very busy a day or two after they release these things. And they all get pretty busy after any release. But if you don't monitor these things, you probably will have some questions that you can't get answered. So enough said. Oh, and one other comment, Windows. If you're running Windows, especially Windows 10, I'm still on Windows 7 because it's stable. Every time it seems that Windows 10 sends out a new upgrade, this thing explodes with, I don't have any audio anymore, because Windows 10 seems to, with every upgrade, mess up all of your USB ports and your audio connections and all that stuff. So be careful if you're doing this stuff with any software really, but if you're using Windows, make sure you document well your COM ports and your audio connections and all that stuff. So if they get changed, you can move them back to where you want them to be. Okay. And also make sure with your USB ports and stuff, you turn off the power saving stuff, because if power saving comes on, it's going to mess them up also. Just a couple of quick comments about Windows problems that I have learned about. Okay, let's keep going. You really have to read the fine manual. There is a lot of information out there. Just as I earlier said, you really need to read the release notes on the new ones. Read the fine manual. You will not operate FT8 effectively if you don't. I can't say this more strongly. Most of these, and I mentioned, most of the stuff that comes from WSJTX, the answers are in the manual. People are just too lazy to read it. I'm only going to cover a very small portion of the application, so you really need to read the manual. First comment, if you're on Windows clock, the Windows clock is not good enough. I use something called Meinberg NTP. It's a free download. You get it working, you just ignore it once it's working. And my Windows clock is within 100 milliseconds all the time, something like that. If you don't have internet, you can get a GPS dongle. They're pretty cheap. This is something you really need to think about if you're going to run field day, for instance, when we get back to running field day in the field. Because you really need to have something to make sure your Windows clock is correct. Okay. And for those of you who don't know, just type time.is into your favorite search engine and you'll get your time back, and it'll tell you how close your Windows machine is to real UTC time. And I don't know how this may work with Macs as well. I really don't know, but it's something you really got to worry about. If you think about it, especially with FT4, it's a 7.5 second time. If you're off by a half a second, a major part of the synchronization is gone. And it sort of seems to work up to about a second off. I've seen decodes up to about 1.5 seconds, but the more your computer is off, the less likely that you will get decodes or other people will decode you. Okay, here's what the GUI looks like, the graphical user interface. It's in two parts. I'll go through the parts by themselves. The bottom is your standard waterfall. It's got a control panel down here. And there are two sort of goalposts up here. The upside down green one is your receive frequency. The regular goalpost red one is your transmit frequency. And you can set these as you wish. You can set them in all different kinds of ways. I'm not going to go through all the details, but basically this is what a standard waterfall looks like. I don't know, this was probably 20 meters at some in the afternoon or something, pretty busy. The top part, you've got the left window is everything in your bandwidth. Everything that was decoded here on the waterfall is being listed here, okay? On the right-hand side, here's the receive frequency. That, what you're seeing there is being listed over here, okay? And what these things mean up the top, UTC, obviously is the time. dB, that's the signal noise ratio, minus 19 plus 8, whatever. DT is the delta time. These are all pretty much within 100 milliseconds of real time. The audio frequency and the message. And for instance, if you click on, I have it set up so if someone calls me, someone calls CQ, it's green. You click on that, and it'll start sending CQ. And here, I clicked on this thing, and here's my message going back to them. Obviously, FN42. I was down here that time. Here's all these messages you can set up. Predefined messages are pretty much set up, and this is that TX5 I mentioned. You can pretty much change. In fact, when you do, there's a drop down here. You can hit the drop down and pick whatever you've already preloaded. So that's a very quick summary of the control panel. Again, I'm going through this quickly. It's something you read the manual, start playing around with it. You can't break it, and you know, you'll learn it. But it's something you do. There is a learning curve, pretty obviously. Let's. I want to talk about this one thing. Down here in the middle is this thing called hold TX frequency. Okay. Here's my TX frequency in this case. You click this thing. What this does is freezes that. Okay. Now, just like any kind of DX thing, you don't want to call on their frequency. You want to be calling split. Okay, so if this guy's listening here, or this guy's transmitting here and I'm listening to him, I want to be transmitting where there is no signal. So I set up my transmitter, turn this on, and it transmits there. Not only will it stay there when I'm transmitting to this guy, but when I finish with this guy, if I tail end another QSO, if I go over here and say, oh, this guy over here is calling CQ, click on this guy, either down here or up in the control panel, it'll still keep it there. So it stays in what at least appears to you to be an open frequency. So it's, you know, no sense transmitting on top of somebody else. Now, the WSJTX is really good at unscrambling signals on top of each other, but you might as well give it as much chance as possible. And there's two things to think about in terms of being an open frequency, because not only are you frequency, but you're time sliced. So in this case, here's the guy, him and him. These are the two slices when this guy I'm trying to talk to is calling CQ. This is open and this is open because you're alternating. He transmits, I transmit. She transmits, I transmit. So I'm actually going to be transmitting in this open time when there's nobody there. So you actually have not only frequency diversity, if you will, to pick a slot, but you have time diversity to pick when you want to transmit. So there's sort of a two-dimensional situation in terms of being on a different frequency. So that's important to remember. A lot of people call, they don't call split, they call right on top of the guy that's calling CQ. And of course, too many people there, it makes it tough to decode. So don't do that. No sense calling on their frequency if everyone else is especially. So let's go to the setup screens. Again, I'm just going to go through these fairly quickly just to give you some feeling for them. You can hit F2 and this comes up, or from the main menu, file settings. There's a general tab. It's where you set up sort of the way you want things to work. You can set up the different fonts. I'm not going to mention what the watchdog is, but you ought to learn about it. The default is 3 minutes. Basically what this does is if you've been calling CQ or trying to answer someone after 3 minutes, it shuts yourself down. So you can't be sending for hours. Okay. The radio is where you set up all your CAT control, push talk methods, all this kind of stuff. Again, you set up all the data just like you'd set up any kind of CAT control to your rig. I want to talk a little bit though about this thing called split operation. Okay, split operation, as I mentioned, you want to be split. Okay, that's one thing, but there's a second piece to this. Okay, and I use what's called fake it. You can do this with your rig if you want to. If your rig has, you can run and split, but I use fake it because it lets the computer do it. It's a lot simpler. What this does is it moves your RF and audio frequencies in opposite directions. Stick with me for a minute, so that the actual audio frequency you're transmitting is between 1500 and 2000 hertz. Now, why does it do this? Well, if you're between 1500 and 2000 hertz audio, It's in the part of your transmit bandwidth that is the flattest. So there's the least amount of phase shifting going on. If you're transmitting up around 3,000 hertz, you're on the skirts and you're going to be having some strange things going on with the phase of your audio signal. It also means that if there's any harmonics, 1,500 hertz, the harmonics are going to be at 3 kilohertz outside the passband. So this does two things. It keeps the audio signal the cleanest, both in terms of harmonics and in terms of phase. For instance, this shows me it's like 2120. So what this does, if I start transmitting, let's say it's 20 meters. It actually, instead of transmitting a 2120 audio signal, it actually moves the RF frequency up by 500 hertz, moves the audio frequency down by 500 hertz, and the actual transmitted frequency stays the same. Okay, so let me give you an well, why is this important? Here's why it's important. Here's a guy, this is the worst case I've ever seen, vastly overmodulated with bad harmonics. This guy, whoever he or she is sitting down at 400 hertz, okay? Look at these harmonics. If you get up to here, down on the spectrum display, you can actually see the 8 separate audio channels being transmitted. Not only is this guy way overmodulated, but because it's at 400 hertz, it's just splattering all over the audio band. Anyone near this person, wherever or whoever it is, would not be, it's almost unusable, okay? Be blowing it away for everyone else in the area. If Fake It was turned on, at least it would have moved this 400 hertz signal up to 1,600 hertz. It'd still be way overmodulated, but at least all these harmonics would be out of the passband. So use Fake It if you can. And this is just amazing. I've seen a number of things, but this one, when it came across, actually I saw this in an email. Someone asked a question on this WSJTX thing. They sent this out and said, "What is this?" They had never seen anything quite this bad, and neither had I. So this is why you use Fake It and don't overmodulate. And this is probably because he had his ALC turned up too much, but who knows? Anyway, a few more things. Audio, here's how you set up your audio. You want to configure for 4,800 hertz, 16 bits. It's not the default for Windows. I think Windows is 4,200 or something. And you don't want to use your Windows default device. In fact, in the latest versions, I don't think this is allowed, because if you use your Windows default device, you'd be surprised what you hear. I've heard some very interesting audio in what are, remember, our CW and digital portions of bands. People, in fact, going in somehow and leaving their microphone hot, and you hear them talking in the background. So be careful about how you set up your audio. Don't use the Windows default device, or you'll be listening to something and you'll hear "got mail" in the background or something like that. So here's where you set up the audio I/O. Okay, and normally when you hit the drop down boxes, you'll see all the different audio set up for you. Transmit micros, I mentioned that this is where you can set up that TX5 thing. I've got one, for instance, set up from Maine 73. So if I'm up there and I talk to someone, I can say, "Hey, I'm in Maine, not in Massachusetts," because people normally think I'm down here because my license is in Massachusetts. Or I can say, "Thanks for an all-time new one," or "Thanks for a new state." So this is just a way of sending back that final, this works especially if they're using RR73 again, where they don't need to see this. You can send sort of a quickie thank you. Reporting, this is how you set up your reporting. I always have prompt me to log QSO, because if I don't do this, I forget to log the thing, because this forces a window to pop up. You turn on PSK reporting here. I'll talk about that later. I'll be talking about JT Alert later. This is where you set up the UDP stuff going between WSJTX and JT Alert. Again, frequencies, this is where all the default frequencies are. You can add something in there. Lately, for instance, I've been starting to work on 60 meters. And I had to add the 60 meter channels in here because they're not part of the defaults. Colors, you can set up what colors you see and prioritize them on this thing. And advanced, I haven't played with these up here. I've taken the defaults. Again, the manual describes what all this degrading signal to noise for WAV files means, whatever. Haven't really studied that. Down here is where you can set up contests. If you're going to run field day or the VHF contest, this is how you set that up. You put your exchanges in, and you may have heard of Foxhound. This is where you set up that for DX stations. So, and then there's a lot of other stuff up here. I'm not going to go through these at all because I'm already getting short on time. Read the fine manual. Okay. Let's go on to JT Alert. JT Alert, basically, this is what JT Alert looks like. It basically sits in between WSJTX and your logger and provides audio and visual alerts for what you're looking for. It's that simple. One comment here, I have a 23-inch monitor. I don't think you want to try to run WSJTX and your logger and JT Alert, or there's something else called Grid Tracker. It does similar things. I don't know anything about it. On a laptop 13-inch screen. You'll go crazy. You need a good sized monitor. But this is, again, the JT Alert thing. What it does is it takes these messages from WSJTX, it compares them to your log in your logger, and these are the loggers that it's compatible with. DXLab, AC log is the one I use. I think this is log for old men. I don't know for sure. HRD, it's compatible with these, plus a standard ATIV file, and sort of downloads this thing and then compares. And it says, here's a state you need. And I have it set up for, these are the defaults pretty much. Black words, black letters on a yellow thing, it's a new state I need. Or red is a new country. Or this little flag over here means they're on a logbook of the world. Or a green thing says, they're calling CQ. So you see this thing, I want to talk to this guy. A guy in Arizona, I haven't talked to him. You click on this thing and it automatically goes over and sets up WSGX and it starts transmitting. So it's so easy, it's almost cheating. It makes it so easy to find DX that you're looking for. Okay, really, really powerful little thing. It's freebie. This guy down in VK land does it. He's very good at support. And again, there's a hamapps.com website and email reflector that if you're going to use it, you ought to be on and monitor and read. The way this thing works, basically, this is, again, the main thing, but you hit settings, and there's a thing up here called Rebuild Alert Database. You click on that, and it pulls the info from your logger down into JT Alert. This is not automatic, so whenever you upload new confirmations into your logger, you want to do this, okay? You can also do this manually. In my case, because I've got Woburn and Maine QTHs, which are different worked all states listing, are more than 50 miles apart. So I have to manually keep track of the states. So I don't have this do the states. I do that manually and just click on this thing, and you can set these states up individually by band for what you're looking for. So this is how you set it up. It's not that hard to do. Another piece of the thing is that, as I mentioned, it's got all these colors. You can set the colors you want. For instance, and this is actually the priority as well. So red is my call. If someone calls me, I want to see it first, and that's the first thing that's going to come up. And you can turn on and off what you want here. CQ zone, I need one more CQ zone, Perth, Australia. Zone 29 is a toughie. I don't have it. It's the last zone I need for all 40 zones. So that's one of the things I've got set up to listen to. The other thing things you can do when you go to the alerts thing, you can set it up to see these logbook of the world flags, as I mentioned. And in fact, I have it set up that I only see alerts from people on logbook of the world. I don't want to fool around with people not on logbook of the world because it's too hard to get a QSL. So I just want to see people here on logbook of the world most of the time. I may turn this off if I'm looking for something real rare, but most of the time I'm only looking at alerts from people on logbook of the world. So the nice thing about this, in addition, is it's got voice enunciations. So, if something comes in that a DX comes in, it says DX or new state or calling you if someone calls me directly. And you can set this, these have languages, and you can even have a male or a female voice, etc. There's even, I think, English versus American versus Australian, something like that. So you have all kinds of different WAV files you can select for this. Very powerful. Other things that happen if you hover over one of these calls, it tells you the details of what's going on with that station. If you right click on it, you can send text messages to them. You can go to the QRZ page. If you hover over here, it gives you a picture of the activity on the different bands and the different modes. Lots of stuff. Okay, let's keep going. Reporting sites. You want to know what's happening out there? Well, JT Alert, DXMaps, and PSK Reporter are the ones I'm going to talk about. JT Alert has its own. It basically does what everything else does. There's a chat thing. There's all the calls you saw, the calls that saw you, and the clusters pretty much the same. I don't really use this very much. I mean, you can set it up for just seeing your own stuff. Here's all the things I've seen. Here's all the people who saw me. Fairly standard reporting site. As I said, I don't use it very much. I don't find it too useful. The one thing I have found it useful for, you can search on calls by state. And the last state I need down here for work, 5-band worked all states, is Alaska on 80 meters, which is tough to do. So here I'm looking at Alaska on 80 meters, and here's all the guys over here that were on 80 meters. And maybe I can go send them an email someday and say, hey, can we set up a sched? So that's the JT Alert thing. My go-to station, I have this set up all the time. My go-to reporting site is DXMaps, DXMaps.com. Basically, it's a world map with all the stations that are going on at the time, and you can there's all kinds of things you can set up. You can either see this as a world map, you can see it as a list, same information listed by time, by stations, and what they were doing. Again, I'm going through this rather quickly, or by graph, and I find this really useful. This is 20 meters. Here's PSK, okay, and all the same frequency. Here's all the CW guys, here's all the phone guys. So you can sort of get a feeling for who's out there and where they are as well in terms of frequency. You click on with DXMaps, you click on a particular call, and it gives you all kinds of information about the call. And there's all kinds of options. I usually have mine set up so I have the gray line shown, and I'm looking at stuff coming in here from the PSK Reporter. I show the grid squares, and I show the call signs. Okay, so all kinds of interesting ways I find very, very useful when I'm trying to track what's out there. Last one I'm going to talk about is PSK Reporter, which a lot of you may know about. When I first turn it on, it's almost overwhelming. There's all kinds of stuff it shows, and almost too much. I mean, it's hard to get much information out of this at all. However, if I set it, for instance, to show everyone who heard me, so I'm basically saying who's heard me in the last hour on all modes. Well, these are all the people that heard me over the last hour on this particular day. So must have been a good day. It was probably 20 meters or something. It's it's at night, so maybe it was 40 meters, because here's the gray line. So that's useful. Here's a case where I want to know who I was hearing. So I have it set up, received by me, on this case, FT8 for the last hour. So here's all the stations I saw that I heard on this particular day or night. And in fact, if you click on one of these little bullets, it brings up all the information about that person. This happened to be AA7G in Maine back in 2019. So if AA7G are out there, I was listening to you. So most importantly, or most usefully in a sense, there was one night when Brunei was coming in on 30 meters spotted. I was calling him and not being heard. I can't remember. I think he was on CW. And so I went into PSK and searched on him for the last hour. And sure enough, he's talking to a lot of people, but notice there's nobody over here in Eastern US. He was not hearing anybody over here. And although it didn't help me getting him, at least it made me feel better that it wasn't just me. He wasn't hearing anyone in Maine or Massachusetts. So very useful. Very powerful PSK Reporter. Again, something I find useful for doing particular studies like this. I use DXMaps as my sort of daily kind of thing. 2 more slides. What's that meant for me? Well, this is where I was for DXCC back in April 2017. This is before it started. I had phone and CW, DXCC on 40 and on 20 and on 15 and phone on 10. And I had DXCC on phone and CW. And for those of you who don't know what the DX challenge is, it's sort of, it's instead of countries, which is DXCC, this is band countries. So if, for instance, if you talk to 100 countries on 10 different bands each, you'd have 1,000. 1,000 is the minimum here. Or if you talk to 200 countries and had 5 different bands on each one confirmed, it'd be the same 1,000. So this is band countries. So this is where I was back in 2017. This is where I am now. Okay. The yellow is mostly, well, the yellow in the previous slide was ready. This is all FT8. So adding FT8 to 80, well, I got mixed. I haven't gotten anything else yet, but I do have mixed there. I got digital on 40, on 30, on 20, on 17, on 15. I'm getting 160. I've got 83, so I'm still working on DXCC there. 12 is my latest thing. I'm working on that. It's got 89 there. Six I've gone from, let's see. I had 26 states on countries on 6 meters. I now have 52, pretty much all due to FT8. 60 meters I just got into about 4 months ago. I've got 48 countries all on FT8 on 60 meters in the last 4 months. DXCC now on digital, and I actually finally got the DX Challenge. This is DX Challenge is only sort of mixed. I keep track of this for my own reasons, but DX Challenge, and I'm another 80 countries there, and I get the next level of DX Challenge, which is 1,500 banned countries. There's 3264 of this right now, the maximum you can get here. And just in case those of you who don't know much about DXCC, the maximum is 340 entities. 331 is where you get to be on this thing they call the honor roll. I got a long way to go there, but whatever, probably never get there. But it's not something that I aspire to particularly, especially during, well, maybe if I'm still active at the next Sunspot maximum in another 4 years, maybe, you never know. Anyway, my last slide, some final thoughts. Keep your clock accurate. Windows clock is not. If you're running these things, remember, if you're trying to decode something and it doesn't seem to be working, they may be running a contest or in foxhound mode or something. So you need to be aware of these different operating modes. In this case, I mean operating modes, not FT modes. As I mentioned, split is good for DX. Use fake it. Use hold DX frequency. You don't want to be all over the map, and certainly keep track of overmodulating. I mentioned don't allow extraneous audio in the audio chain. Make sure you have that set up. And finally, how much power do you want to run? Well, according to Joe Taylor, which I happened to see him mention this in some, actually it was Zoom meeting he was in about a year ago. If you are receiving reports consistently above -5 dB, you're probably running too much power. I mean, that's sort of his operational definition of how much power. So if you're running, if you're getting received reports back from your QSO partners that are up in the +10 or +15 dB range, you're running too much power. If you're not, if you're down -5 dB or so, you're probably fine. So that's it. I thank you. This talk is up on my website, QSL W1DYJ, and my email's there too, so you can send me any questions you have. And that's it. I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay, thank you very much, Larry, for all that information. A ton of information in a short amount of time. Thank you very much.
Sort of information packed, but.
All right, thank you.
And I hope all of you go try it. Just read the manual.